Good afternoon to all, and thank you for joining us on this snowy day. I am Mary Jo Bain. I am the academic dean here at the Kennedy School of Government. On behalf of the Harvard Center for European Studies and the Kennedy School, it's my honor to welcome you all to what I know will be a very interesting and important forum. The US and Europe, how can we face the changing world order? We are honored to host in this forum Prime Minister Dominique de Villepin today. Over the years, this forum has hosted many great leaders from the French Republic. Past speakers have included the Minister of Defense, an ambassador, and the President of France. We are, as you know, at the Kennedy School, a very international school. Currently, we have 15 French students obtaining their MAs from the Kennedy School. And between Harvard College and the graduate school programs, we have 82 students from France enrolled in the university. Professor Stanley Hoffman will now introduce the Prime Minister. He is the Paul and Catherine Buttenwieser University Professor at Harvard, where he has taught since 1955. He was chairman of the Center for European Studies from 1969 to 1995. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Hoffman.
Well, it's an enormous pleasure for me to introduce Monsieur de Villepin, and this is not a formula. I have met a few statesmen in my life, and there isn't one who I esteem as much as him. He has had a brilliant career as a diplomat for much of his life. He has had very interesting postings, including several years in Washington in the 1980s, from 84 to 89. He has been the second counselor of the French embassy in New Delhi. He himself was born in Morocco and spent some of his early years in Latin America. And he is a wonderful example of somebody who is both an intense patriot, one isn't a Gaullist for nothing, and a cosmopolitan. And the second reason why I am extremely fond of him, fond is the word, is that if you read his speeches, you will find that the most eloquent and the most moving are speeches about the benefits of cultural diversity, the need for different cultures and different continents to preserve their values and their traditions, and the need for the countries that consider themselves either more advanced economically or more ancient or what have you, not only to respect that diversity, but to find out as much about others so as to avoid humiliating, ignoring, or simply misconceiving what goes on in those countries. This is not a virtue one finds every day. No comment. The third reason why I want to salute Monsieur de Villepin here today is that at the beginning of the disaster of Iraq, he gave at the United Nations Security Council a speech which I think many of us remember with great emotion. It was a beautiful speech. It was a prophetic speech in many ways, but it was, above all, an act, in my opinion, of friendship for the United States, which the Washington administration, in its obtuseness, misinterpreted completely. And allow me this occasion to pay tribute also to the man who had to go through this period without ever losing his temper, the ambassador of France, Monsieur Jean-David Levitte, who is here today. who was the perfect diplomat, and also, where is he? The Consul General of France. Yes, here you are, Monsieur François Gauthier. Monsieur Gauthier is not only Consul General, but is not an habitué of Harvard. He was a Weatherhead Fellow for a while, and I didn't want to neglect those two. But it is Monsieur de Villepin's afternoon. He is a man who, as you know, is not only a statesman, but also, in France it's not so totally surprising. In America it's more rare, which is not a criticism. He's also an intellectual. One of the things he does best, actually, is to write books. And he has written books about poetry, about the state of France, and about history, including a book about Napoleon, which now allows all of the people who haven't read the book to call him a Bonapartist. That's what happens to you if you write. There's a French expression which is n'écrivez jamais. Never write, in this way you won't be misunderstood. But it's a great, great pleasure to have him here at Harvard. It's a goal that some of us have had for many years to bring him in. And I think, as the students kept chanting in 1968, I hope that ce n'est qu'un début, it's only a beginning. Thank you very much for coming so numerous, and let us now listen to Monsieur de Villepin.
First, allow me to thank Harvard University, the Kennedy School of Government, and the Mida de Gunzburg Center for European Studies for welcoming me here today. I had the pleasure to share a moment a little while ago with Dean Ellwood and Professor Joe Nye, and I would like to thank Mary Jo Bain, Academic Dean of the Kennedy School, for her introduction and this magnificent forum in which I now have the privilege to speak. I would also like to offer my very special thanks to the directors of the Center for European Studies, and of course its founder, my very good friend, Professor Stanley Hoffman, who so kindly presented me. And I must say that one of my best wishes would be to stay a couple of weeks more in order to be sure that I could be present for his courses on Camus, which is one of my favorite authors. You don't know how lucky you are. You better go and listen to him. I would like to pay tribute also to the Harvard professors who are among us this evening, and to the students for whom this forum was created. All of us here know that we are standing at a major crossroads in the evolution of our planet. In the past few years, our world has changed. Globalization has profoundly shaken the great international balances. It's a formidable challenge for all of us. It is a risk, of course, but also an opportunity. If we want to remain in control of these changes, we must better analyze them and better understand them together. That's what I propose to you today. Let us leave out our certainties by the wayside, see the world as it is, and together move forward toward greater justice and peace. In difficult times when we don't know exactly where to go to, I think it's very important to take some distance and try to look at things in a different perspective. I remember when I was the age of many of you, a little more than 20, in 1975, I had just finished my political science in Paris, and I was hesitating in which way to go. So I asked my father, and he told me, I think the best you should do is go to Harvard. But he had something. He told me, here's a ticket. You're interested in foreign relations? Go to South Asia. It was the end of the Vietnam War. It was the withdrawing of the American soldiers from Vietnam. And he told me, just go there look around the countries, meet the people, you will have a better idea of what kind of a world it is. So I went there, and I found out that very little people knew that de Gaulle had made a speech in 1966, the Phnom Penh speech. Everybody forgot what he said at that time. And 20 years after, the Americans were doing exactly the same mistake that we've made. Exactly the same. So I thought, well, I'm going to be a career diplomat. And I never came here. And for me, a big, big pleasure to be here. Because I think maybe together we won't make 2 times the same mistakes. My first point is that the lack of a world order is the real threat today. We should not just consider the crises of the world, which are numerous, but look at the global international system. Because in many ways, it might be easier to change the system than to change the behavior of each of the actors of the system. In the past, we had 2 great spheres of influence, the West and the East. We had 2 superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The balancing point in this power relationship might have been unstable and dangerous, but it existed. Today, this balancing point no longer exists. The center has disappeared. That means in today's world, there's nothing imposing order on the disorder of the planet. Certainly, there are multilateral institutions, but they can't work to their full extent to establish true global governance. Nations' commitments within these institutions are not always on a par with the states. Unilateral decisions call the legitimacy into question. Yet, make no mistake, the sum of individual interests does not add up to the general interest. The legitimacy of multilateralism will be built by states on behalf of the values that transcend us. It's true that some countries have more influence than others, but none can impose a new world order on their own. Can't the United States play this role despite everything? Indeed, it remains the leading power. It alone has all the necessary attributes: military strength, economic power, the capacity for technological innovation, the attractiveness for its way of life. Throughout the 20th century, it was also able to construct an economic and cultural model and forged an ideal of modernity that inspired the admiration of the rest of the world. For us, America represented the camp of freedom. You were the guarantors of human rights. And personally speaking, after having lived in the United States and come to love this country, I want to tell you that America remains a dream for many people throughout the world. But now let's take a clear look at things. The war in Iraq marked a turning point. It shattered America's image. It undermined the image of the West as a whole. It is time for the United States and Europe to regain together the respect and admiration of other people. But we must understand that the world disorder is aggravated by a sense of deep injustice. Our world is experiencing unprecedented technical progress. It is creating more wealth, offering more opportunities than ever. This presents an opportunity for all those countries, nations, businesses, individuals who have the necessary assets to profit from these upheavals. But for many others, this shift means growing inequalities, new risks, and heightened fears. These fears exist in Europe, and notably in France, where some are afraid of a challenge to our model of social justice. In the area of social rights and legal norms, globalization did not bring various rules closer together. Competition is occurring on a global scale, but it is asymmetrical. New commercial balances are leading to outsourcing and endangering the social entitlement programs of developed countries. These risks strike first at those who are the weakest, those who have no education and no skills, those who have no access to world culture. I want to say this to you. You are the elite of international education. You have a responsibility toward all those who did not have your good fortune. Harvard is something people dream about. And I know that Harvard is doing its best to offer help, commit itself in remedying the world's disorders. But these risks are also beginning to affect the middle classes, who feel increasingly fragile, with some growing impoverished. If globalization is to end with the disappearance of the middle classes, or a confrontation between the poorest and a minority consisting of the very rich, then it is time to react. Diversity is key to society. Balance is key to society. No people will tolerate growing inequalities in the long term. What's true on the national scale is true on the planetary scale. Globalization is destabilizing some developing countries, undermining their economies. Consequently, it is heightening ethnic and religious tensions. It is threatening the planet's natural resources and its balance. This is the world we live in, a world that is more complex and more unstable than ever. This global disorder is neither superficial nor temporary. It is perpetuating deep imbalances, economic and demographic imbalances, first of all, that are speaking more and more massive migration. This is a major challenge, not just for developed countries, but also for the countries of the South themselves, which are faced with the risk of losing a significant part of their youth, sometimes the most skilled, or threatened with instability by the passage of more and more numerous migrants. That's why it is so important to build partnerships with those countries, making it possible to better control migrations while actively promoting co-development. Nor should we neglect the importance of a new strategic challenges such as the fight against pandemics, the protection of global assets, energy security, and the access to natural resources, particularly water. Global disorder is also engendering security imbalances. The aggravation of crisis nurtures terrorism. The attacks of September 11 marked the advent of a new era of hyper-terrorism. The resolution of regional crises is crucial to our security. We know they directly or indirectly fuel the terrorist threat, as is the case both in Iraq and with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Finally, global disorder is causing power imbalances that are challenging the non-proliferation regime. Today, nuclear proliferation is threatening to reach a new threshold. The temptations are legion, they are strategic, with states seeking to turn their territories into sanctuaries. They are political, for acquiring the bomb is still perceived as an element of status in the international scene. And they are economic, with networks making large profits from trafficking. Faced with this situation, international instruments are now insufficient. They remain essential pillars of peace and collective security in the world. But they are also colliding with the difficulty of control and the insufficiency of norms themselves. We must preserve and strengthen them. The survival of the international system of non-proliferation and security is based on its credibility. This presumes the ability to constantly adapt to the challenges we are faced with. Faced with this global disorder, we have a choice. Either we maintain the competition among our states, or we resolutely embark on the path of cooperation. Competition among our states is in no one's interest. The only possible road is that of cooperation. And that is the second point I want to raise. In this path toward a new world order, I strongly believe the United States, France, and Europe have more duties than others do. Why? Because we are democracies imbued with the ideal of universalism, because we are wealthy countries, but also because we have common interests. Fostering international society, sharing our commitment with more and more countries. First, it is our duty to work together. Because our destinies are linked, our friendship is profound. Our histories are intertwined from Yorktown to Omaha Beach, from Rochambeau and Lafayette defending American independence to the Marshall Plan, enabling a liberated Europe to regain prosperity and democracy. Today, we again stand united to defend our values and our way of life, particularly as we confront the threat of terrorism. Europe is the United States' only global ally. That is true on the political level. The things that draw us together are stronger than the ones that divide us. We share fundamental values, democracy, human rights, the same concept of the role of the individual in society. It's true on the economic level. Europe is the leading destination of American investment and the leading investor in the United States. And it's true with respect to security. Our cooperation in the field of intelligence is exemplary. It is up to us to build a partnership of equals. It is in Europe's interest for the United States to be powerful yet open. It is in the US interest to have a Europe that is not submissive but strong and responsible. Europe is America's partner, not America's rival. It's when we act together that we are most effective. This can be seen in the case of Lebanon. From the adoption of Resolution 1559 to the resolution of last summer's crisis, it was our joint action that was the key to the solution of the situation. To achieve this, we both have to make an effort. Europe is not assuming all of its political responsibility. I see today two crucial needs for Europe. The first is to re-establish a true common project and to adopt a new founding text. The second is for Europe to assume its role as a military power. As disastrous as force is when used alone, it is equally disastrous to have a policy with no force behind it. European defense is no substitute for NATO. By strengthening it, we are strengthening Europe's abilities to contribute to the world's security and to bear its share of the burden. We saw this last year in the Democratic Republic of Congo, when Europe guaranteed the security of election and thus contributed to the stability of a country that's so key to the continent. Inversely, the adjustment of NATO's role, essential since the collapse of the Soviet Union, must leave room for the affirmation of a European defense. America, for its part, must better take into account the world's realities. We've seen this in the latest major crisis. In a world of asymmetrical conflict, a military campaign of a few months may be followed by endless years of crisis. The military should more than ever be part of a peace strategy. That is, of course, essentially political. We don't believe that democracy can be imposed by force. The United States' true strength is not its army. It is its ability to embody progress and modernity. It is its mastery of cutting-edge technologies. It is the attractiveness of its land and its culture to the rest of the world. On the diplomatic level, it should be its ability to exert renewed influence, to share its demands for democracy with more and more countries. It is by building a consensus through dialogue that the greatest possible number of states will come to accept our political choices and that they will have the best chance of success. Yes, the modern form of power is both influence and the ability to act together. Let's bring others along in our wake. Let's show that we have strong proposals and strong convictions. There is no power in standing alone. There is only organized, shared power. So what do we need to do? In order to be effective, our cooperation must serve a system of world governance that gives room for everyone. We are two nations that share humanist values and the same aspiration for the universal. We must set an example. Let us be the pioneers of a new international ethic. Let us defend strong principles. First, the respect for rights, including in the fight against terrorism, because security is, in the long run, inseparable from justice. Frustrations and inequalities nurture conflicts. The best response democracies can make to terrorism is remaining true to their values. The second principle is the respect for different identities. They lie at the heart of all tensions. More effectively, taking them into account is a moral condition, but our security hinges on it as well. The third principle is the use of force in a legal framework and the primacy of collective security. It is this condition alone that guarantees the legitimacy of an action and a lasting solution to crisis. We've just seen this in Lebanon. It was by backing a UN resolution with the agreement of the parties and the support of all the members of the Security Council that a bolstered UNIFIL was able to have an effective presence in Lebanon. On the strength of these principles, we will be able to reestablish a more effective international governance through renewed multilateralism. This is true in political sphere. It implies more representative decision-making bodies. I remain convinced, in particular, that the enlargement of the Security Council is essential to the strengthening of its legitimacy, better taking into account the weight of Japan, Germany, the major emerging countries, and Africa, is a guarantee that our collective decisions will be better accepted by all. That also implies decision-making bodies that are more mobilized in crisis management. I think it would be useful to have a monthly meeting of Security Council members at the ministerial level to bring responses to current crises. More broadly, we need instruments that are on a par with the stakes. The UN needs the true clout of an armed peacekeeping force. Today, nearly 100,000 blue-helmeted soldiers are deployed throughout the world. The UN Secretariat, like all the world's army, needs a permanent military staff. In the long run, a real UN army must be our objective. That is how the international community will be able to fully assume the collective responsibilities imposed upon it. To prevent humanitarian tragedies and face emergencies, we must implement the responsibility to protect that the UN recognized at the behest of France. I'm thinking in particular of the Darfur tragedy, which is threatening to draw all of East Africa, and perhaps beyond, into a destructive, dangerous conflict. We must also apply these principles to economics and development in order to humanize globalization. At the world level, this is why I propose the creation of a World Economic Council, in order to better structure the dialogue between the major international economic bodies to ensure consistency and a common ambition, that of a more equitable system of trade, to meet the Millennium Goals on health, water, education, and infrastructures. We must also go farther in the establishment of innovative means of financing that alone can make it possible to procure the resources that we will never obtain from state budgets. That is what France has done with the solidarity contribution on plane tickets, which it wants to serve as an example and a precedent. This pilot project deserves to be extended. It's a matter of respect, dignity, and justice. On the European level, Europe is today the leading provider of aid. It is Europe that has the longest experience of cooperation, particularly in Africa. Now we want to go farther. In the area of peace and security, which are the prerequisite for development, Europe has established a European Facility for Peace that is enabling it, notably to be the leading contributor to the financing of the African Union force in Darfur. In the area of trade, France wants new economic partnership agreements between Europe and developing countries, particularly in Africa, that serve their interests. It is up to us to take into account the specificities of the countries concerned, and it is up to us to help them comply with the rules of the WTO. Among the emergencies of the world today, finding a collective solution to the crisis in the Middle East is, I believe, a necessity. A necessity if we want to maintain our global equilibrium. And this will be my third point. The Middle East today is being torn apart by a series of crises and fault lines that threaten to join together. They bring together all the factors of instability: civil and regional wars, terrorism, proliferation risk, the displacement of refugee populations. Our top priority should be building a lasting peace in the region. Make no mistakes, the various crises playing out in the Middle East have their own logic, but they are linked. Because they have their own logic, we should deal with them separately. Because they are linked and could become linked even further, we must deal with them simultaneously. Indeed, the risk is that those whose interests don't lie with peace will exploit them, establish new ties between them, and make them even more dangerous for the international community. That is why I would like to share some of our train of thoughts, beginning with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In this conflict, the principal elements of a solution are clear: the renunciation of violence, the creation of two states living in peace and security, are and will remain the point of departure of any viable approach. But to move forward, we must go further on three elements. The first is the absolute need for international re-engagement within a precise framework. Because the parties cannot succeed alone, neither the United States nor Europe is doing enough. Let's keep the quartet format, but give it a real power to take initiatives. We need an international conference as soon as possible that, together with the party, will establish the framework for a resolution, with which the moderate Arab states in the region must be associated, particularly Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan. Let us fully restore the aid to the Palestinians. What Europe is doing currently with the temporary international mechanism cannot be a lasting solution. We must resume direct assistance to the Palestinian National Unity Government as soon as it is inaugurated. We must also resume aid to cooperation projects in order to re-establish the conditions for real development. Let's set also a timetable. It should include short-term elements to help rebuild trust by giving the parties a chance to show their good faith: the release of Corporal Shalit, the resumption of Israel's payment of tax revenues to the Palestinians, a halt to rocket fire. It must also set a medium-term deadline. Together, let us propose to the Palestinians and Israelis a fixed date for the creation of a Palestinian state. Around this date, which should be rather close, a true political dynamic will be established. The international community could offer guarantees for Israel's security with an international force in exchange for an Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank. The second element is the need to better take into account the realities of the ground. We must help Mahmoud Abbas and give a chance to supporters of peace by facilitating change within Hamas. That is why, for example, France supports the Mecca Agreement on a Palestinian National Unity Government. I was among the first to recall the three principles of the quartet after the Palestinian elections in 2006, and we will remain vigilant with respect to the composition and action of that government. But the most important thing is to launch and nurture a process that leads Hamas to evolve and to accept these three principles. The third element is the creation of a regional dynamic that presumes the stabilization of the immediate environment of Israel and Palestine. That is, progress with Lebanon and Syria. A sovereign Lebanon with stable, controlled borders is a guarantee for security for the whole region. Syria must assume its responsibilities and make the necessary gestures toward the international community. After that, it will be up to us to give it a full role to play, notably in the framework of a renewed partnership with Europe. A comprehensive, lasting settlement must indeed include a settlement of the Israeli-Syrian aspect of the conflict in accordance with Security Council resolution. In Iraq, the situation has deteriorated too much to hope for an immediate settlement. But it will be even more dangerous not to establish a framework for ending the crisis. For my part, this framework should include two tracks. First, we must be clear on a timetable for the withdrawal of foreign troops. I believe that it should take place within a year, during the year 2008. That will allow Iraqis to feel that their future is in their hands and put them back on the path of national sovereignty. To eliminate the spiral of failure, we must begin by reestablishing real political prospects. The second track involves a triple mobilization to bring about these political prospects. A mobilization by the Iraqis themselves, which must involve a crucial national reconciliation, notably by offering a power-sharing agreement to all those who renounce violence and by completing the process of constitutional reform. States in the region, from Turkey to Iran, from Syria to the Gulf states, must be mobilized in support of this process to ensure Iraq's territorial integrity. And finally, there must be an international mobilization when the time comes with an international conference. The United States should, of course, play a central role in this, but Europe too must assume its responsibilities. Finally, the overall vision required for this region demands a full accounting of the Iranian challenge, which does not involve proliferation only. An Iran with a military nuclear capability is unacceptable. But this crisis is also rooted in Iran's desire to assert its regional power, its national pride, and its concern for security. That is why the solution can't be a military one. To the contrary, it means recognizing Iran's role in the region and establishing a stability process among all the countries in the zone that permits dialogue and guarantees peace and economic development. That is why the approach we've taken is political, combining dialogue and firmness. That is the point of UN Resolution 1737, adopted unanimously in late December. The sanctions set forth in the resolution respond to the Iranian refusal to suspend its sensitive nuclear activities. If Iran makes a gesture to suspend enrichment, the Security Council can suspend the sanctions. The path of dialogue remains open and for us remains a priority. In this new phase, it is essential for the international community to remain united. This is one of the achievements of the work undertaken 4 years ago by the Europeans. More than ever, it is the condition underlying the legitimacy of our action, and thus its long-term efficacy. The United States has a major role to play to end the crisis. My conviction is that when the time comes, it will take place through the engagement of a real bilateral dialogue with Tehran. Ladies and gentlemen, in the profoundly new world that is taking shape, we need a resolutely new diplomacy. Never have there been so much instability. Never have the threats been stronger. But never, perhaps, have solutions been so close. Today's diplomacy must be one of action and results. Diplomacy can no longer be founded just on hard power and force, but neither can it be founded only on soft power, the power to influence and convince. Diplomacy must now be based on building power, goodwill, imagination, solidarity. Yet the United States and Europe have a particular responsibility when it comes to crafting lasting solutions to the challenges of our time. Let us gain strength from the ties of friendship between our two nations in finding the answers expected by so many people. Let's place the transatlantic relationship in the service of a new world order that has room for everyone. Together, let's act as builders to move toward greater peace and towards greater justice. Thank you.
The Prime Minister has agreed to answer questions, and we have about a half hour to do that. There are 4 microphones. They are here, and up there, and over there. So anyone who would like to ask a question should make their way to a microphone. May I ask each person who is asking a question to identify yourself briefly, and to remember that the best questions in this forum are questions which are brief and which end with a question mark. We will start over here and go around the room. So first question.
My name is Tawfiq Rahim. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School from Canada. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for your speech here today and your appeal for a new global order. Let me just say before I ask my question that I hope with your statements about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you will work with the rest of your European partners to recognize the democratic government of Palestine and its legitimacy, and as well lead the quartet to that conclusion. My question pertains to your discussion of disorder in the world and the respect for different identities. I wonder how you view those two things in the context of your domestic situation in France, and the role that disorder and sometimes the non-recognition of different identities plays in the upheaval that we saw happen in France in the past couple of years. And specifically, I'm talking about the sense of economic deprivation that plagues a lot of the suburbs, the sense of non-participation held by many immigrant communities, and in some ways, the disrespect for the ability of French people to have a Muslim identity and express that.
It's a tough question, but very important one. And each country has to find an answer, taking into account its own history. And the French history is a very specific one because everything started in France in the modern times through a revolution. And in this revolution, we took a very important stand, which was to say that every man, despite the color of its skin, despite its religion, has a universal value. And this has led us to construct a republic in which we only recognize citizens, not communities. So I make a very strong difference between communities and identity. I think it's very important to keep intact the universal part of each of us. And we always considered in France that recognizing communities was taking apart something to the Republic. So we consider that everyone has to be recognized in itself, and not because he's part of a religious group or an ethnic group. That leads us to a very difficult challenge. And the situation is different, of course, than the one in UK or in the United States. But I think it's very important at the end to consider that that gives rights, of course, to every citizen in the country, but also it creates duties for each of them. That's why we decided to have a law on the signs in school that does not allow anyone to show its own belief, religious belief, in schools. Because we feel that we were going to go into the community matters if we were going to accept, for example, that young Muslims go to school with a veil. I think that the stand we have taken culturally is very important, and we must stick to it. Economically, that supposed, of course, that we give a second chance to the one who has started in a difficult position in our society, coming from abroad or coming from some poor neighborhoods without an ability to really find their way in our society. That means a very special effort, but not with what we may call positive discrimination, just giving a new chance and having the society mobilizing in order to find right answers to each of these people. So the problem is, how can we be consistent to our values, to our view of a universal republic, and at the same time find personal and collective answers to each case in our republic? That means that every citizen of this country must believe that he is a part of the solution. He must be engaged in finding the right solution. And of course, when you are facing difficult economical situations, it might be more difficult for certain people to accept to play this game, to accept this rule. But I believe that it's very important in our societies to make sure that common values, universal values, should be at the heart of our system, because they are the best answers that we can give from the attacks coming from the outside of Islamism, for example, or any kind of radical attitude. So I believe each country has its way, but it's very important for us to keep the path and the track of the Universal Republic.
Good evening, Mr. President. My name is Lilian Khoury. I'm from Syria, and I'm a freshman at the college. You talked about negotiating with Syria concerning the Lebanon problem and the Iraq issue. And I was educated at the French High School of Aleppo, and I wondered how you thought we can do that. Is it through schools, organizations? How can we get Syria, not only Syria, but in essentially how to get them to negotiate and work for this?
Well, I believe you're right. It's not just the problem of Syria, but the problem of the Middle East as a whole. And I believe we are facing today a new situation in the region. For many years, the number of crises had been growing up. 5 years ago, there were just one crisis in the Middle East, the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. Today we have 4: Iraq, Iran, Lebanon and Syria, and Israeli and Palestine. 4 crises. If we don't take care, all these 4 crises might be tomorrow just one huge, big crisis at the center of the problem of the world. We have very positive elements that happened during the last months. One is the fact that many Arab countries today are ready to get involved in peace process. I think the attitude of Saudi Arabia, for example, Egypt, Jordan, trying to push forward a better understanding between the Palestinians, between the Lebanese, shows that they understand that if they don't do something, then the cut between radicals on one side and the moderates is going to create a very, very difficult situation to handle. So I believe more and more countries do understand that if they don't act positively, if they don't take in their own hand the future of the region, they might be facing difficult times. And I believe Syria can understand that it might be difficult to face a situation of chaos in Iraq, a situation of great difficulty in Lebanon, no prospects for the region. At the end of the day, it might be difficult for them to deal all this complexity. So I think the problem is, how can we reintegrate all these different countries, Iran, Syria, making sure that they understand that they have obligations, that they must comply with the international obligations, but making them also understand that they can gain a lot of profit in behaving in a different way. Of course, Syria will have a strong economical interest for the Syrian, a very strong political interest and social interest in playing collectively with the region, in deciding not to look in their own problems, but to look at the region and play collectively with not only the big countries, but with the countries of the region. So I think we are maybe at a turning point in which, if we are able to make all these countries and people understand that something needs to be done, because if we don't do it, then the more radical groups are going to be the winners in this region. So I think the responsibility must be there, and we should try really to take the advantage of this awareness that is growing in the region today. So I believe, of course, there is a lot of reason to be pessimistic about the future of the Middle East. But we have also today some possibilities in the hand that should help us to see the future in a different way.
Mr. Prime Minister, thanks for coming. My name is Eric Maltzer. I'm a second-year, final-year student at the Kennedy School. I'm actually writing my thesis on unemployment in France, and one of the things that you mentioned is having the universal republic. Everyone's a member of the nation and not just a certain community. But as you know, there are certain communities with unemployment problems that are much worse than others. What's your solution or ideas for solving that disparity?
Well, I hope first that in a couple of months or years from now, you would have no reason to write about such a subject. We've been working very hard on this matter. And when I arrived 2 years ago, the unemployment in France was 10.2. And today it's 8.4. And we hope that we may get down 8% at the end of the year. But still, we are facing some major difficulties. The youth, the problem of the seniors, people above 50, problem of women, which are very specific problems in the job market. My belief is that there is just not one single reason, but many, many reasons, and a difficulty for France to adapt to the new rules of modern time, which is globalization. And this means that we should be very pragmatic in handling all the different tools that may help us in having a better score. The problem is, in France, we are facing a situation in which a large part of the society is afraid to take radical decisions. They're afraid that the traditional social system might change too much, and they might be in a position of not having any kind of protection. So we must take into account the mentalities, the way people think, and the realities of history. We are a very specific country in which protection is very high, the role of the state traditionally very high, and when things are not going well, people do say, well, what is the state doing? What is our government doing? In this country, they say, well, I'm just going to face the situation by myself. In France, they believe that the first responsibility is to the state. I think we should not cut with this tradition, but progressively adapt our system. And for that, we need to go in a gradual way. And we want to make sure that everybody is going to support the reform, which is very difficult, because from time to time, you want to go fast. You want to take the shortcut. And sometimes you are wrong, because you get everybody on the streets. So it is a matter of context, situation. I believe that there might be better moments to do important reforms, just after presidential elections, for example. But I think we still need to work on a consensus where everybody will understand that if we want to have more jobs, we don't need to work less in order to let the others have a little part more parts for more jobs. But we need all to work more to get more market and more competitivity. This is part of a whole change, a whole revolution in the mind. And this is, I believe, a necessity that must be prepared. And in order to prepare it, we must force the country to look more at what the others are doing, to look more outside, to look what are the different experiences, to look what the Germans are doing, the neighbors and other countries, to compare the different possibilities. Of course, this might be easier if the growth in our country should be higher. We are approximately at 2% today. At 3% growth, it's easier to make these changes because people are more confident. They look forward in a better way. So I believe that we might get this good conjunction which will allow us to go forward, take the right measures, and change substantially the system, but keeping in mind that we have a very specific system, which is a good compromise between social protection and initiative. We need to better the things, but not change radically the system.
Christian Marquand, mid-career student at the Kennedy School. My understanding is also that we have an old system, not only a specific system, but an old system. And to some extent, I think that the American system, although it's much younger than ours, is old in some ways. And these systems, by definition, maybe are not the ones that change so easily. You mentioned the possibility of maybe a new international ethic. How about the possibility of a new ethic within the limits of our borders? At some stage for what is of the international stage, you said that maybe the whole system sometimes can be easier to change. Can we envision a possibility someday where our system could really change and where our values could be alive? Liberté, égalité, fraternité?
I think in a democracy, this is a combat of every day. Freedom is not something you get forever. And equality is not something you can consider you have reached and that's it. And it is true that in our country, like in many old democracies, we get accustomed to situations. And we must really be convinced that we should adapt ourselves every day. If you take freedom, it is true that if you want to innovate, if you want to create, if you want to be able to have the feeling that you are giving the best of what you have, you need to have a system that helps you. If you have an idea, you want to create a company, it must be easy. Of course, in a traditional France with a heavy state, it was very difficult in the past. It's getting easier. But this is something we should work on, and we should do it with a lot of humility. I believe equality is one of the key factors of change in France, because equality very often is considered as synonymous of jealousy. We are ready not to get more if the neighbor is not going to get more. This is a perversion of the system. We should be living in a country where everybody could go to the top. Everybody could have a different life if he's going to do the right thing and work and get the benefit of its work. Maybe there is some kind of a sclerosis in many parts of our society. And that's why I believe that we should really keep going and keep giving a hand to the people, to the young people mainly, that do not have the same chance than the others. Our system of university, our system of grandes écoles needs to open. And I believe globalization gives us a possibility to have contacts, exchanges, to open our system And this is going, I believe, to change the mentality of the people. So I'm not pessimistic about the possibility of doing that. I don't think that it is better in other countries. I think we should understand that in order to keep what we believe is good in our country, we need also to open to differences. So that's why I believe we should be faithful to what's also a big tradition in our country, going out, sharing with others our values, having the sense and the spirit of initiative and of adventures. That's also part of the French spirit. And I think we should really develop that in our country.
Hi, my name is Deanne de Grammel. I am a freshman at the college. My question follows upon your comment on the difference between the universities and the grandes écoles. I have cousins in France who are currently going to university and starting their careers, and one thing that I've really noticed is that though it is great that free and universal university education allows opportunities for so many people to get an education, there's also a huge disparity between those who graduate from universities and from the grandes écoles. How can we increase opportunities for people who do not have the opportunity to go to the grandes écoles and increase the French youth's hope in the future?
Well, I believe that the answer is try to create much more relations between university and grandes écoles. It should be easier for somebody in university to go in grandes écoles and for somebody from a grande école to go to university and have a different career. So more exchange is the key. There is a second factor I think it's very important in our system, and it might be also a challenge for all democracies. We have to understand that life does not end up at 20, 22, or 24. And whatever is the diploma, whatever are the studies you've made, whatever is your education, there's nothing more important than your personality. And personality is not always something that you get only in schools, university, or through education. It's something you get through life. So the more you travel, the more you're mixed, the more you know the culture of others, the more you are able to understand the language of others, their cultural differences, the more you are able to have a sense of your capacity in changing things, the more you are going to adjust and adapt in life. I believe that somebody who is 18, who will take the risk to go 2 years in China, 2 years in the Arab world, 2 years in South America, at the end might have a better experience than many young people going through traditional studies. And I believe in the world tomorrow, what people are going to look before is experience, personalities, and optimism, the capacity of creativity. There is nothing more important. When I receive young people and I look which one is going to be the good one in order to help me in having the right answer to any problem, the best quality you look for is creativity, imagination. And the more you've been under tradition, under the strong rule, the less you may have creativity. It's very rare to find young people just going out of school who have this kind of creativity. When you go through life, when you go through difficulties, when you go through challenges, when you have experiences in different social contexts, you get this different spirit. And I think that's very, very, very important. And also, important to be able to go through different experiences. If you want to work in finance, go and study movie, go and study arts, go and make sports, you should go in different disciplines. Because at the end, that will give you a different mind, a different way at looking at things. I think life is not written. You see, 10 or 15 years or 50 years from now, we were living in a world with constant growth. You are going to live in a world with much more chaos, much more crisis, much more difficulty. And at the end of the day, it is, at the bottom line, it is only your personality that will make the difference. You will be changing jobs, changing countries, changing lives. And it is your capacity of answering different situations quickly. Find the right answer quickly. You are in China, you don't know where to go, you need to find the right answer, you'll find in yourself. And if you've been educated to behave with a strong commitment to values, with a strong commitment to opening to the others, you will find the right answer. That's why I always tell to my son, meet different people. Go in the Foreign Legion. Go in the... no, but, I'm not kidding. Go out of a plane in a parachute. Take risk. Life is good when you take risk. Then you will learn something very important that you won't learn always in university or in school. You will learn something about yourself. You will learn that when you believe you have limits, you may go a little further. So my generation, we went to Nepal, we went to India, we went, all around the world with nothing, a couple of bucks in the pocket. I think today we should do it differently, but we should do it.
Hi, my name is Chiaki Yamada, a second-year student here at the Kennedy School. And since France abolished death penalty in 1981, I have an impression that France has been expressing a strong opinion against it, and that impression has become stronger recently. What is the underlying rationale that France, as a country, has to be an advocate of abolishing death penalty? I'd be really curious to know your response, especially from a place where death penalty exists. I'm from Japan, not the United States, by the way. I personally think that capital punishment does not really solve the problem itself, but I have not come to a point to make my stance. Could you please help me understand the fundamental rationale? Thank you very much.
I think it's very important to understand that behind death penalty is the way we look at the other in front of us. Any human being has something special. If we consider that, we should respect life in itself, even if we are facing somebody who has done the worst thing, the most criminal record. We must consider that life has its own value in itself. Life has been given. No human being can take it back. I think for a democracy, it's very important. And that's why President Chirac decided a couple of weeks ago to have this fundamental element as part of our constitution. And we believe that our position against barbaria is much stronger when we refuse the death penalty, because we are committed to respect any life. Of course, we are in a world and countries where we need sanctions, and sanctions must be sometimes exemplary. But taking out a life is something different. And I think for a democracy, it is a very interesting test, because it's very difficult for a democracy to face barbarians, Nazi, fascism, criminals. But what makes the difference of a democracy and another country? What makes, at the bottom line, the difference between a democracy and any other country is that a democracy is not going to use the weapons of the others. Some weapons are not going to be used because that's part of the ethic. A democracy should not torture. You should go and listen to Albert Camus. He made it very clearly. Because when you use torture, when you use death penalty, you downgrade yourself, your soul, your personal view of human being. While if you don't answer, if you use different means, respectful means, at the contrary, you celebrate what man has for the best, a certain idea of humanity. You see, I spent 3 years of my life in India, and that has been really something that changed me. And certainly one of the men I have the most respect for is Gandhi. Facing violence, facing any kind of injustice, this man decided not to answer in the traditional way, not to use violence against violence. And this has been the most revolutionary way of answering to violence, because it shows a different figure. It shows that while you attack, you keep the face, the image, the attitude of a real human being. And I believe at this point, you have the difference between an exemplary democracy or just any kind of democracy. Or, in my mind, a democracy should always be exemplary. What I'm saying is not easy to practice. It's a lot easier to say that in theory. But democracy is not democracy if it doesn't serve an ideal, a certain idea of man, a certain idea of society. And we all must, in our daily lives, try to go forward and reach this very point in which we feel proud of being human beings.
This will be the last question.
I'm Charles De Segundo. I'm an MPA student here at the Kennedy School. I have a question about the upcoming presidential election in France. If François Bayrou wins, what will happen to the Assemblée nationale? And if he doesn't, why don't you think he will win?
You see, a couple of weeks ago, I was in London, and I was honoring Harold Pinter and giving him the Legion of Honor. And Harold Pinter made a speech, and he said what he thought about the Iraqi war. And one of the person who was there said, "Harold, I really suffered listening to you, because they always told me that one should not accuse its own country in a foreign land." It was in the French embassy. And Harold Pinter said, yes, but many of the people who are dying in Iraq, they are dying in a foreign land. So I'm not going not to answer to your question, even if I believe that French politics is French politics and the Prime Minister should not talk to French politics abroad. But I'm not going to go into the details. We are, like many democracies, in a situation where the French citizens are wondering what is going to be their future. And they are questioning. They're asking themselves, who is the best? We have a new generation coming on the scene. Who is the best? It's not easy. We are not looking at a movie. It's not just to say that, well, he's cute, she's beautiful. You know, that's not what it is about. This is a difference between a democracy and Hollywood. And at the end of the day, it's difficult to know exactly what a candidate would do when he's going to be, maybe, a president. So people are going from one to another, and you see the polls doing that. And sometimes you forget that the polls are only talking about 50% of the French, because the other 50% they haven't decided. So all this is just comments. It doesn't have any ground. And that's where I believe democracy should be more silent sometimes, the media more humble, and respectful maybe a little more of the citizens, giving the position of everybody, but not entering in this competition which looks more like a horse race than a real democratic combat. The fact that in France, some people may think, we've known the left, we've known the right, now we're going to try the center. Okay, but what's going to be next? In a democracy, you should choose, and it is not easy. So I believe today people are concentrating in who might be the one who would be the best place to answer the problem of the French. Tomorrow, they will compare. We are not in the phase, 7 weeks to go, we are not in the phase where they're comparing one to another. They will compare, they will see the debates, they will see the arguments of each of them, and then they will decide. What I can tell you is that the French are a surprising people. They never do what you thought they were going to do. They are very independent, but when I look backwards to the history of my country under the Fifth Republic, they had never been mistaken. That's why I can say as a Prime Minister, I'm confident. So I'm not answering your question about one specific person, but I'm confident that the choice will be the right choice for a country that needs change and has the capacity to win the challenges. Thank you.
The great strength and the great joy of this forum here at the Kennedy School is the opportunity that it provides this enormously diverse community to engage in dialogue on the most important issues. And the best forums are the forums where the speech is provocative, the questions are terrific, and the answers are a model of clarity and good humor. So I want to thank the forum staff for putting this all together. I want to thank you for being a wonderful audience on a dreadful day, and I especially want you to join me in thanking the Prime Minister.
Thank you.